Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Well, I hope you're all ready for Christmas, and it's probably too late now to order my books even from Amazon and get them there by Christmas. You know, maybe if you have Amazon Prime, you can still do it. I don't know. Can't guarantee that can happen. Definitely too late to order any of my wooden spoons or bowls or anything like that. But if you need a last minute Christmas gift, don't forget that you can buy someone a subscription to either of my Substack newsletters. That's Judson Carroll Master Herbalist or The Uncensored Catholic. The URLs are in the show notes. And remember, I'm giving you 2 free ebooks. So a subscription to one of my newsletters is $8 a month. And so for as little as $8 a month, you can give somebody a free subscription, and I'll send you essentially $20 worth of ebooks, and that's a great deal. And I don't care if you keep the books for yourself or give them to the other person, or actually if you each keep a copy, because they're PDFs and I really can't control what you do with them, and I don't mind if you keep one for yourself and share it. So remember, if you need a last minute gift, that I'm going to keep my phone on through Christmas Day, and this is what I did last year. There were a few people that realized they needed something at the last minute, and they did that, and so I was glad to do it. Helped them out, helps me out, helps everybody out. So remember, if you wake up Christmas morning, you realize, oh, I forgot to get so-and-so, whatever. Whether it's a newsletter, you can keep the newsletter for yourself. If it's somebody that just wants a cookbook, tell me which books you want. You just send me an email, and I'll send you a PDF of the Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking or the Spring Foraging Cookbook or any of my herb books or religious books. So, pretty much everybody on your list would fall into one of those categories, and always glad to do such as that. And that's it for the the promotion this week. One of my favorite albums, actually, of the 1990s was by a band called BR549. And their classic album was really a live album. It's called Live at Robert's Western. It was really unique because during the concerts that this was taken from, they have, they give like a little commercial for, buy my records. And on the CD, it's actually listed as record plug. And then another time they say, be sure to tip your waitresses, and it says tip plug. So as you're going through the tracks, you actually see where they have done their little promotions during the show. What a fantastic band. If country music was still country music, that would have been one of the most popular bands of the late 90s, early mid-2000s. Remarkably talented, fun, often humorous songs, but such great musicians. If you haven't checked them out, I know you can find that album, at least a few tracks from it on YouTube. BR549, that was taken from, I guess it was the second incarnation of the Andy Griffith Show. It was like, no, I'm sorry, wait a minute, that was, this actually comes from Hee Haw. It's a line from Hee Haw, if I'm not mistaken, and it was an address. It was like BR549 was a mailing address, and they took their name from that. Really recommend that band. If you get into that kind of thing, Dale Watson was phenomenal. Absolutely should have been one of the biggest stars. His life kind of fell apart. I remember that he was performing at the Grand Ole Opry, and I was watching it, and suddenly somebody calls him off stage, and his wife and daughter had just been killed in a car accident. So really knocked him down. He's come back and he's made some more albums, but really derailed his career. Obviously, it was really horrible, and really a band called the Derailers. They were awfully good. Never their recordings were overproduced. Nashville would not let them sound like they did on stage. But if you're looking for some really good country music, that just for fun, just enjoyable, definitely BR549, Dale Watson, the Derailers, and absolutely Junior Brown. My gosh, I saw Junior Brown so many times live in concert. Probably one of the top 5 greatest guitarists of any genre ever lived. Again, funny music. He did a couple of music videos that were produced by the Coen brothers, the same guys that did Oh Brother Where Art Thou and Fargo, and I think they had something to do with King of the Hill. I mean, so really unique, interesting, funny music. But I mean, any of these guys, these bands would just drop your jaw in terms of musical talent and ability. And it's such a shame that Nashville at that point took a turn, and they decided they just wanted little blonde girls to sing pop music, and every now and then some teenage guy with ripped up jeans to basically imitate John Mellencamp and call it country music. And they just destroyed 100 years of history and heritage and just real true talent. It's no coincidence that all those great musicians from the 60s and 70s that had made their way in rock music started hearkening back to the great songwriters like Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell. I mean, Bob Dylan with his Nashville Skyline album, and the Byrds with Sweethearts of the Rodeo, and the Eagles, and of course Creedence and the Allman Brothers. I mean, all of them were just hugely influenced by really good, real earlier country music. Janis Joplin, certainly, and you can go down that list. Just so many really great bands, and of course Linda Ronstadt, and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's just a little aside, a little tip. Now let's get into the plants, and the plants we are going to talk about this week will be from my spring foraging cookbook. We're going to talk about ostrich fern and bracken. Really love these plants. I've written an entire book on the medicinal uses of ferns, but we're going to talk a little bit about the medicinal uses, but more about the edible on that. Then we'll get into our medicinal herb for the week. And I pretty much finished up the medicinal weeds and grasses of the South, that's of the Southeast, and they grow everywhere. That's just my reference point, So we're going to start talking about medicinal shrubs and woody vines. That's another book. It's one I really haven't talked a lot about on the podcast. It's a really unique book. It was certainly one of my better books. Not one that's sold a lot, believe it or not. There's some powerful herbal medicine in medicinal shrubs and woody vines. And we're going to start with serviceberry. Unique plant with a unique history in the United States. Very useful. I think you're going to really enjoy this. So let's go ahead and get started with ostrich fern. Now, for generations, Europeans, Americans, Canadians, Chinese, etc., have enjoyed ferns, eating ferns. The bracken fern has been traditionally considered one of the spring's first wild edible plants. It's enjoyed all throughout Europe. Very popular in Austria and Germany. Used to be very popular in England and Ireland and Scotland. With the world wars and industrializations of foods, people kind of stopped foraging a lot. That's really, that's one of the main points of my my foraging books. And they cover herbal medicine, but they're really more in terms of cookbooks, is to get people back to eating wild plants seasonally, because the flavor's incomparable. You're never going to buy something from a grocery store especially processed food, anything in a can or a box or frozen or anything. But even in the produce department, that's going to give you the flavor of wild edible plants. And I believe that every single edible plant and medicinal herb on the face of the earth has some constituent to it that is beneficial to human health in one way or another. And I can look at my great grandparents and great great grandparents and going back hundreds of years. They all lived to be, with just a few exceptions, like a medical error, a rare cancer, or especially killed in war, or the results of war, Civil War, Revolutionary War. Dysentery killed more people than bullets. Starvation killed more people than bullets. So I can't say they all lived to be 100 or 110 years old, but a lot of them did. A lot of them did. Before modern medicine, before we had a FDA-approved food pyramid that's given everybody diabetes and heart disease, before the government started saying we know best, before people stopped growing their own food in their garden and sourcing wild foods from nature. That's foraging. It's also hunting and fishing. People ate a huge variety of food, much more in terms of variety than the average American could ever imagine. I mean, I think we get this idea that because we have more ethnic foods in America now than, say, they did 50 or 100 years ago, we're getting more variety. We're actually not. We may have, well, actually, I can't even finish that sentence. It was intended because if you go back to a cookbook, say the Virginia Housewife or the South Carolina Housewife, two authors to whom I'm somewhat related, or even a little further back, get into those were both written in colonial times, or, well, just post-colonial. One was the daughter of a signer of the Declaration of Independence. The other was I think, cousin to Thomas Jefferson. So we're talking just, very early America, but really more of the colonial mindset. But you can go back 100 years before that, or 100 years before that. You can go back to medieval times. You can go back to Apicius in ancient Rome, or what's his name? Bartolomeo Scapi, I believe. He was a chef for one of the popes, another one of the earliest formal cookbooks. But then there were many written after that throughout the Middle Ages and into the Victorian and the Regency period and all that. You'll see that they used a huge variety of herbs and spices. The only time we really get that many herbs and spices combined is like if you go to an Indian restaurant. Their curries tend to be very highly spiced. Maybe in an Afghani restaurant, Lebanese, they like a lot of spices, and I mean variety spices. I don't just mean hot and spicy, but some Asian cuisines, certainly Vietnamese use a lot of spices. Certain areas of China, Thai, but for the most part, the average American in their diet, we are still in the meat and potatoes mindset. That meat and potatoes mindset came out of necessity during times of scarcity, especially during the wars, or especially like when Irish imitated during the potato famine. The English only let the Irish grow potatoes. They didn't have the potato famine because they were too dumb to grow anything else. The English said, no, this year you're not going to be able to grow wheat. You're not going to be able to grow broccoli or spinach or cauliflower, or, any of the vegetables you've been surviving on for the last 10,000 years. We're only going to allow you to grow potatoes because you're going to be the potato producer for the English Empire. The blight hit, half starved to death, not due to their inability to grow food, but because of a mandate by the government of England. So when they came to America, they had been basically living on potatoes and had very little meat and very little in terms of variety or herbs or spices. And so the meals of basically salted meat, when you think of Irish food, you think of a lot of salted pork, even though they were once probably the largest cattle farming country in the entire world, making tons of butter. By the time they got to America during the potato famine, those that survived had learned to basically live off potatoes and salted meat. So immigrant food was often very, very sparse, very limited. And that's true of, poor Italians coming over, between the world wars or just in the beginning. I mean, you think about all the wonderful flavors of Italy, where they didn't have olive oil, and they didn't have basil and oregano and pine nuts and all the stuff we think of when we think of like Tuscany, or we think of the wonderful Mediterranean style sauces. They didn't have it, even though that had been part of their culture for thousands of years. Again, going back to like Apicius and ancient Rome and ancient Greek. No, they came over dirt poor, and they had learned to subsist on a very poor diet. Well, when you get into the colonial cookbooks, you'll find that just say circa 1750 to 1800, a little before, certainly a little after, Americans were eating a huge variety of food and spices. We had some of the busiest ports in the world, and in these cookbooks, there's tons of nutmeg and cinnamon and cloves and what we would think of as sweet spices. Also, tons of bitter herbs, different varieties of pepper, not just like black peppercorns, but long pepper. When during times of scarcity, like by the time we hit Revolutionary War period and the ports were closed, or by the time they hit the War of 1812 or the Civil War, they couldn't get those imported spices. So that's when you see cayenne pepper beginning to replace black pepper for a while. Well, by the World Wars, rationing was in place, and we were basically reduced to, really during the wars, cheap cuts of meat that had to be boiled, long and slow into stews and gravies, and potatoes, and, not a lot else, other than what you could grow in your backyard. Maybe you had a few greens to add. It was times of scarcity, and that's really where our mindset comes from. Our idea of American food is more the food of the wars and the Great Depression than it is the foods of really just a generation or two earlier, which were, ample and abundant and diverse. And I think that great diversity of food and herbs and spices and all that, and whether it's plant, vegetable, or spice. I wouldn't put it. Spices are plant-based, but I don't really consider them a food. They're a seasoning. I think all of them add to health. I mean, we found recently so many health benefits in saffron. Saffron was just considered a very expensive herb, actually, but used as a spice. We found all kinds of health benefits in cinnamon and black pepper. The more of these varieties of flavors and ingredients you put in your food, it does tend to prolong health. I mean, you can look at certain Asian cultures, or the French. We'll take two examples. Chinese culture, they drink very heavily. I mean, that's just been a traditional part of their diet. A lot of alcohol, just as it has been in England and Ireland and Germany and all that. Very low incidences of liver disease. Well, it could be because of all the sesame oil they use. Sesame oil is very protective of the liver. Likewise in France, which is known to be one of the heaviest drinking and heaviest smoking countries on earth. China also, they smoke a lot of cigarettes. But in France, I think the average is 3 bottles of wine a day per person, and usually about a pack of cigarettes a day. And they have very low instances of cancer in general, but very little liver disease. And why is that? Well, they eat a lot of real butter, not the pasteurized garbage we have on our shelves. They eat a lot of duck and goose fat. Again, liver protective. They also eat a lot of vegetables. The French are known for their salads. The French are known for, really seasonal eating. And that has a lot of anti-carcinogenic properties, a lot of antioxidant properties. So this is why I'm big on, this kind of thing. Now, how does that relate to ostrich fern and bracken? Well, if you don't live in the New England states, you've probably never seen fiddlehead ferns for sale at your local farmer's market or a grocery store. Now, our ancestors would have looked forward to this as a early spring vegetable, no matter where you were, pretty much in the United States, outside of a desert maybe. Ferns grow in very cold and very warm climates, but they do need a certain amount of precipitation. People would have looked forward to these ferns and sought them out as food. They continued to be popular well into about 1970, early 1970s. And Even today in Pacific Northwest or in New England, you may see this as a seasonal vegetable. Now, you might have to go to a specialty market for it. And the thing is, it may be growing in your backyard, okay? So, bracken was the traditionally harvested fern. But in recent decades, the government has decided that it could be slightly carcinogenic. Take that with a grain of salt. Our ancestors ate it for thousands. Actually, ferns are the oldest plants on the face of the earth. So literally, it would have been the first thing man ever ate in this entire world in the history of mankind. And because it's a seasonal vegetable, you only eat it when the fern's just coming up in the spring and it's still coiled up. It hasn't unfurled into a frond. You only get a little of it for a short period of time. So I don't think bracken is terribly dangerous, but as I always say, I have no family history of cancer. I don't worry about such things. If you have a family history of cancer, maybe you should. There is actually a relative to bracken that grows in a region of China, and they do seem to have a higher incidence of stomach cancer in that region where they eat a lot of that fern, because in that little tiny region, the fern grows more abundantly and for a longer part of time, and it's a bigger part of their diet. So maybe there's something to it, maybe there's not. Um, you know, you know how I feel about government experts, especially on health and diet issues. I mean, they pretty much turned a robust, healthy nation with the longest lifespan on Earth into a fat, diabetic, heart disease, unhealthy, depressed culture on 10,000 pharmaceutical drugs with their so-called health advice. Really hoping RFK Jr. gets approved and he can go in like a wrecking ball and clean some of this stuff up, because it's obviously not doing us much good. Our government agencies that are supposed to be there for our good seem to be doing us harm, but again, that's just my opinion. I don't hesitate to eat a small amount of bracken in the spring, but I guess ethically I can't recommend you do so. You're going to have to make your own decisions, like I say in the disclaimer at the end of every show. But fortunately, ostrich fern is nearly as abundant as bracken throughout most of the country. It's actually far more plentiful in the mountains where I live. I have forests full of ostrich fern. I mean, it's really just like super abundant. And for some reason, no one in my area really seems to eat fiddleheads. It doesn't seem to be part of current Appalachian culture. It would have been 100 years ago, maybe 50 years ago. But now, unless you're going to go sit down at a really expensive restaurant in Asheville or Blowing Rock or somewhere, you're probably not going to see fiddleheads on the menu. And you're certainly not going to find them in the stores. Ostrich fern has not been shown to be carcinogenic. Now, you can grow ostrich fern. You can grow it in pots. You can grow it in your yard, depending on where you live. Any nursery that specializes in fern can get you ostrich fern. You can't buy fern seeds. They're an ancient plant that spreads by spores, like mushrooms do. When life first began on Earth in terms of plants, the first things to grow were ferns, asparagus, and mushrooms. Basically, most of the oil that we turn into gasoline and burn in our cars are billion-year-old ferns and mushrooms and asparagus and dinosaur bones, as Johnny Cash said. Well, I guess he was covering an Alice in Chains song. Was it Alice in Chains? It may have been. Anyway, the song was "I'm Going to Break My Rusty Chains and Run." It was on, I think, his last album. It was brilliant. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers played with him on that album. So again, if you're looking for some good music, that may have been the best album Johnny Cash did in his entire career. It was really very good. But anyway, the flavor of fiddlehead ferns is much like asparagus. I mean, you can kind of guess that, right? But it's got a subtle hit of bitterness, and that bitterness is actually very nice. No more bitter than, say, broccoli. So if you're are opposed to bitter flavors, it may not be your thing, but if you're at all into herbal medicine, you've probably gotten used to a little bit of bitter because bitter is good for the liver, and that's a main component of most of the herbs we use. They have a bitterness to them. So cook your fiddlehead ferns the same as you would asparagus. Now remember, this is when the fern has just come up and it hasn't unfurled and it's all curled up and it looks like the scroll of a violin right above the peg. Right, the peg head of a violin has, well, traditionally in Europe, a scrolled carved pattern. That's why it's called a fiddlehead. When it looks like that, pick them. If it starts to unfurl, don't bother. It's going to be way too tough. Like I would with most vegetables, especially anything asparagus like, with the steam saute method, just rinse them in a little bit of water, put them in a pan with just a little bit of water and a little bit of any animal fat you like or olive oil. Place the lid on briefly to steam, then take it off. As the water boils out, they will saute in the oil. A little salt to taste, a little pepper if you like. I do like a splash of lemon juice or lemon zest. Really good. Any kind of garlic or wild onions, ramps, of course, would be fantastic. They usually come in at about the same time. Any herbs you like. A splash of white wine, really near the end of cooking, will make a nice pan sauce. In fact, if you take the vegetables out of the pan and add a little more butter and some white wine, you can add some cream if you like, absolutely. You could add some cheese if you like, off the heat. Don't put the cheese in there on the heat or it's just going to stick to the pan. It's going to make a real nice pan sauce. And if the veggies are a little tough, you can let them cook in that sauce. But usually it's not necessary, honestly. In fact, I absolutely ruined some broccoli just like two nights ago, thinking, late season, it may be a little tough. And I turned it to mush, just overcooked it by like 2 minutes. Was really not happy with myself. But anyway, alternatively, I like to coat such veggies with a little oil and salt and grill them. Like asparagus, fiddleheads go wonderfully with steak, fish, chicken. They also work very well in a basic chicken soup or an omelet. Just drop them in there. Cook them just the same way you would do the tops of asparagus. Fiddlehead ferns, as I said, are popular in Asian cooking, especially Chinese, Korean, and Japanese, as best I can find. And as I mentioned earlier, I mentioned this several times, simple, inexpensive, easy dish I came up with when I'm just craving Asian flavors, and there's not a decent restaurant anywhere near. I just make it with a few fresh veggies, noodles, soy sauce, and sesame oil. It also works just fine with ferns. It's just like a stir fry. Just throw it together or make it into a soup with some chicken broth. Add some green onions or wild onions. I usually add a little hot pepper and, quite good. Often do like a noodle soup that way, or just do the vegetables and throw in the noodles and cook them together like you'd have lo mein, or maybe some rice noodles like a chow mein fun or something. Make it to your taste. It's super easy. I'll give you just like the basics. I mean, cook any kind of pasta you like in salted water and drain. Okay. I usually use spaghetti, but like I said, rice noodles are actually my favorite. They're even better, and they need like very little cooking. I mean, they cook so much faster than wheat pasta. Rice noodles is just like plop them in the hot water, pull them out as fast as you can. They're done. Okay. Super easy. If you're ever backpacking or something, a lot of people carry ramen. Ramen's great to have on a trail. It makes you a nice hot filling meal. Rice noodles, you could actually just soak them in cold water if you didn't have anything to cook over, like fire or, camp stove. So really very easy. But anyway, blanch and drain your fiddleheads or any other green veggie you like in salted water. In a pan, add and that's only if they're a little tough. If they're nice and tender, you could skip the blanching process 100%. So in a pan, you add whatever oil you like to cook with and brown a couple of chopped mushrooms. Toss in a couple of chopped scallions or green onions, ramps, etc. And once they start to cook a little bit, then some crushed chopped garlic. Throw in your fiddleheads, salt and pepper, add crushed red pepper, any spices you like. You like a dash of 5-spice or whatever. You can use chili oil. I've given you my recipe for chili oil before. It's super easy, super delicious. Stir in your noodles and cook together. I mean, it's literally that simple. You're just combining like essentially stir-fried vegetables with noodles. I usually add some soy sauce and sesame oil. on the plate. I don't usually do it in the pan. It's just because the sesame oil smells very strong. It tends to dominate, and actually the soy sauce can make the noodles stick to the pan, unless you're doing it in a really hot wok or something, and then it usually just like steams off. But I just prefer to do it on the plate and add anything you like to it. I mean, to your taste: chicken broth, fish sauce, herbs, a little cilantro. Sometimes I add a little celery top, but it does tend to dominate. Celery just kind of it's strong, and it's pleasant. But if you put that in there, it's become a celery dish at that point. You could certainly throw in beef, pork, chicken, fish, shrimp, whatever you got. So super easy. And most anywhere you live, you can even grow ferns in pots in your house. So this is one, you can domesticate pretty easy. So now let's get on to our medicinal shrub. And it is, the Latin name, I believe, is pronounced Amelanchier. We know it as serviceberry. And there are two varieties of serviceberry that grow as shrubs in my region. That's Amelanchier obovalis, that's coastal plains serviceberry. I don't see it that much, honestly. But then Amelanchier spicata, dwarf serviceberry or running serviceberry, I do see more. They're both somewhat rare coastal plain plants. We do have more of it's a larger shrub, a tree-type form that I don't know if it's native to the mountains. I couldn't figure that out. It may have been naturalized because it's very popular in colonial America. George Washington planted serviceberry at Mount Vernon. Supposedly, I mean, probably predominantly for the fruit. George Washington, well, he had a sweet tooth. He also liked to make a lot of homemade wines and ciders. He was very into brewing and whiskey making and all kinds of stuff like that. So we can assume he was growing it as like basically a fruit tree or bush. Overall, serviceberry is a much underutilized fruit. Research has actually shown that it may have antiviral properties that could be useful in combating viruses such as COVID-19. So good reason to learn to identify this plant that may be growing where you live. Or maybe you can buy one from a nursery and get it going in your yard because you get a couple of elderberries and a few serviceberries, and you're going to have some good, I'll throw in some hawthorns too, actually, but you'll have a good battery to use against some of the viruses that they now call pandemics, or what's that? Over in England, they've got an outbreak of COVID, flu, RSV, and seems like another coronavirus all at once, and they're calling it a quaddemic. And, that's nothing to laugh at. If you get all four of those viruses at one time, unless you're strong and healthy, you probably are going to die. I mean, unless you've got herbal medicines you can use, or I guess, conventional medicines that can help you. If your lungs are in any way in bad shape or your heart's weak, that can be serious. So I think it's good to have these on hand. Of course, I'd also have some Joe Pye weed and bone set, feverfew, that some of the eupatoriums and epilobiums and such as that. Wait a minute, epilobium, that's like fireweed. No, there's one in that family that's also antiviral. Yeah, it doesn't matter right now. I'm sure I've done a whole show about it. You can look or look at one of my books. Anyway, use of serviceberry. Mainly documented in British and American herbal medicine. So, like I said, I don't know if those that grow in the mountains and were grown at Mount Vernon by George Washington and such were native, or if they were brought over from England. But anyway, Gerard wrote of serviceberries. Serviceberries are cold and binding, and much more when they be hard, when they're not ripe, than when they are mild and soft. In some places they are quickly soft, either hanged in a place which is not altogether cold, or laid in hay or chaff. Those serviceberries are eaten when the belly is too soluble, for they stay the same. And if they yield any nourishment at all, the same is very little, gross and cold. He didn't think they were very nutritious, in other words. And he said, therefore, it is not expedient to eat of these or other fruits, nor use them otherwise than in medicine. Now, of course, now we know that's not true. Many of the fruits, especially that they didn't much like in England in the 1500s, they thought they would cause stomach cramping. Well, we now find they're full of a lot of antioxidants and fiber, and a lot of astringent and medicinal properties, as well as being just full of vitamins. So he said they do stay all manner of fluxes in the belly, and likewise the bloody flux. Fluxes means bleeding, or it could also mean diarrhea, by the way. Also vomiting. They staunch bleeding if they be cut and dried in the sun before they be ripe, and so reserved for use. These we may use diverse ways according to the manner of the grief and grieved part. You gotta love that old Elizabethan English. Essentially, they have an astringency to them, and they can help with diarrhea and any kind of internal bleeding, excessive menstrual bleeding, or can be laid on a wound, and that will astringe the tissue, just tighten it up, somewhat styptic in their quality, and reduce inflammation. 1860s, the Confederacy hired a French botanist to basically tell us what we could use that was already growing here in the South, because all imports were cut off. That was one of the main strategies of the North, was to cut the South off from food and medicine and textiles and all kinds of stuff. He said apples and pears, as being the fruits that are most abundantly produced, are the most valuable for the purpose of manufacturing liquors. A mixture of the two produces a wholesome article of drink that does either treated separately. Okay, so he's beginning by saying apples and pears make a better cider or brandy than either alone. I'm not sure I would agree with that, but then he talks about the juices of plums and otherwise maybe like added as their astringency renders the liquor more tonic. Excellent liquor may be produced from both apples and pears by the following method of making cider. He goes on to talk about how to collect the apples and how to press the apples and all that. And then he finally gets to, and this is all in my book, Medicinal Trees, and I've talked about how to make cider before. I mean, you just pick ripe fruit, press the juice out, and either let wild yeast colonize it or put a little anything from bread yeast to brewer's yeast to an actual cider or wine yeast, and the yeast turns the sugars into alcohol. It's super easy, it's a natural process, and it's been done since the dawn of time. But he then says, he recommended it made like champagne, while the cider is fermenting and it's bubbling, but getting somewhat toward the end, when it's starting to look somewhat still, put it in a bottle that'll hold pressure. You cannot just put this in a regular glass bottle, it will explode. Okay, it will then carbonate itself, and it makes a nice, really a dry champagne style apple cider is one of the most fantastic things there is. Honestly, I've been making that much of my life, and it's really very good. You do have to make sure your bottles don't explode, and also as it ferments, the yeast will settle to the bottom of the bottle, which is why actually when in the making of champagne the traditional way, méthode traditionnelle I believe they call it, they have these racks that hold the bottles upside down. Now, you may look at a champagne bottle, you see it's got that really big heavy cork in there that is then wired in place. It's clamped down with wire in addition so it won't pop out. Well, they put the cork down and the bottom of the bottle up, but at a slight angle. And every few days they go in and they turn the bottle like a quarter turn. It's very important. Most people do not know this. In most American sparkling wines are not made in the traditional way. They're actually carbonated like you would a soda. There's carbonation added to them. In the traditional way, the yeast carbonates the wine. And as it does, it begins to die and settle to the bottom. Well, by placing the cork of the bottle at the bottom and the bottom of the bottle up and giving a slight turn every day or every few days, the yeast all forms in a little plug right at the base of the cork. And when it's done, when it's ready, what they'll actually do is stick it into ice water or ice to firm up that yeast and to sort of settle the carbonation a little bit. They then unwrap the wire bail, pop the cork for just a second, it blows the yeast plug out, recork it, put the wire bail back on. Now that's the way they used to do it like hundreds of years ago. If you get a bottle of champagne now, you may notice that the top of it looks like an old Coke bottle. So what they do is they put a bottle cap on there, just like you'd have on a bottle of beer or an old glass bottle soda. They pop that, and then they stick a real cork in there, and then put the wire bail back in place, and then it's usually aged on its side. So if there's any further sediment, it will settle, so that when you get it from the store and you stand it upright, it'll then all go to the bottom. And when you open your champagne, it's perfectly clear and bright and bubbly, and that's yeah, I'm just an aside. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but it's a wonderful tradition. You know, my family's half French, and the Irish side of my family is very much into cider making. So I've always been kind of fascinated in these traditional techniques of making these, especially sparkling beverages, which, you know, are nice. They're really nice. And yeah, anyway. So after talking all about that, he recommends adding the dried berries of the service tree, and he actually was describing specifically Amelanchier canadensis, which is the one that I believe George Washington grew, which means it probably came from Canada as opposed to England, but I'm not sure. It could have been a hybrid, but also one that was specific to the Carolinas. So I don't know. Could be that one. There hasn't been. I haven't been able to find a lot of documentation in recent years on serviceberry. It seems to have been very popular in colonial times, but you know, has kind of fallen out of flavor because it's a bit tart. But this is really interesting. So to this mix of apple and pear sparkling cider, dry sparkling cider, he recommends dried serviceberries or aronia and juniper berries. This would give the liquor, as he said, a slightly bitter taste, and the flavor of the juniper berries, which is very refreshing, and is besides rendered tonic and anti-putrescent. Okay, what does that mean? It means instead of just having a nice alcoholic beverage, you now have a very medicinal beverage. You're going to get tons of vitamin C from those service berries. You're going to get an astringency, which is going to be good for the digestive system and all. You're going to get the juniper, which is going to be good for the liver and the kidneys and the lungs. You now have a medicinal beverage. And he said the use of this drink is one of the surest means that can be taken by the husbandman or farmer from preserving himself from those diseases to which he is liable in autumn, and for the attacks of which he is preparing the way during the greatest heats of summer. In other words, it would probably help against all the flus and colds and all that in the autumn, but also was nice and refreshing and cooling, and would help against heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Can totally see that. He says after the spirituous portions of the liquor have been drawn off, a very agreeable piquette may be made from the pulp which remains in the cask. That means, again, using the lees. You know how you might, how they make grappa. They use the lees of wine, and then they distill it and make delicious. I'm actually a big fan of grappa, and what's that other great Greek beverage that tastes like licorice? Anyway, those are traditionally made from the leaves. So he recommends using that as well. And he said this liquor would be slightly tonic, and to add to it a handful of vervain, 3 or 4 pounds of elderberries and juniper berries. Essentially, right there, you've got an excellent cold remedy. And you know, if you have the facility, if you have the land, if you can set this up, if you can get the licensing and permits, heck, I'd take this recipe and look into maybe making a little cottage industry out of producing this. A delicious, natural, native fruit alcoholic beverage, in the cider at least. Maybe you can't get distillation permits. He says you can do a secondary ferment and do like an undistilled beverage, a strong wine out of this as well. You don't have to distill it. But yeah, I would absolutely look into doing this as like a side hustle, or maybe turning it even into an enterprise. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful to have, 50, 100 acres just covered in fruit trees and bushes and a little cider house, and you make your living growing plants and fermenting this medicinal cider, and you could print this old recipe from resources of the southern fields and forests, so you don't have to make any medical claims of your own, so you don't get in trouble with the FDA, USDA, and all that. And if you just got the permits to do a little home winery, essentially, what a wonderful, relaxing way of making a living that would be. And you could graze all kinds of chickens and ducks under those fruit trees, or keep some pigs, and yeah, it could be pretty darn nice, actually. That was actually sort of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson's vision for America. Little homesteads like that where you would make something like a cider or a brandy or cheese or butter or whatever, and that would be plenty of income for you, and you could live that idyllic, peaceful countryside life that was really only available in America because of all the abundance of land. People say all kinds of stuff about our ancestors came here for freedom. Not really. Our ancestors came here for religious freedom. No, they actually really didn't. I can debunk that one in a moment. I mean, it was illegal to be Catholic in North Carolina. We certainly didn't have religious freedom. The same was true of parts of Massachusetts even. The Pilgrims did not come here for religious freedom. They could have had their religious freedom in what happened were Dutch. Where were they? It doesn't really matter. But anyway, they weren't being persecuted by the Catholic Church at all. They were Protestants in Protestant England that left England because they didn't want to swear to the king and the Anglican Church. They could have lived perfectly fine in several Protestant European countries. Why did they come to America? Not for religious freedom, believe it or not, for land. Everybody that came here for land. Throughout Europe, and especially in England, but throughout Europe, in Germany, that was another big one. The lords, the upper class, had the land. Your lot in life was to be a peasant working on their farm, them taking most of the profit, and you just being glad to have a place to live and a little food on the table, and no hope of anything better for your children. Those people came here for land, and when there was an abundance of land, then everyone could be a country gentleman. Everyone could build their own little estate. From, a small farm that makes some living off raising some pigs and chickens, or a nice big, Mount Vernon or Montpelier or, anyway, Monticello. And that was the goal. That's actually what our Declaration and Constitution was written to provide for all of us. Where did that go? I mean, seriously. As the descendant of people who actually sold land to George Washington, yes, there's deeds where my family sold land to him when he was building Mount Vernon. I think it was like the other side of the river, some of the Carrolls up there. Land and opportunity to buy land was once available to just about everybody. It was the American dream. You work a little bit for somebody else's apprentice or a farmhand or even a slave. Even slaves could buy their freedom and then buy property. We don't really get taught that in the history books, but the majority of not only Africans but Irish that came to America came here as slaves. Irish are the most enslaved people on the face of the earth, whether you want to call it pure slavery or indentured servitude. The difference being a slave was due 50% of his product, the work he did. By law, a slave was due 50%. An indentured servant was due nothing but room and board, because he had essentially sold his future to get passage over here to get out of starving in Ireland. The American dream was literally save up a few bucks, buy a few acres of land. And it worked. It worked real well until we essentially began imitating Europe with, the wealthy buying up huge tracts of land and renting it to people, or the banks control mortgages really were a big part of it. Mortgages were not common. Really, even before the 1950s, it was people were ashamed to have a mortgage. Yeah. I mean, seriously, look it up. It's part of popular culture. There's actually a song written, "The most beautiful house in the world has a mortgage, but I don't care." That it was rare to actually be in debt. We've gotten so far away from the original vision that our founders had for this country. And it was that of the small farmer, the craftsman, someone, a free person doing what they wanted to do and then trading those goods to others and everybody in a mutual beneficial relationship. Add, put in there taxes, income tax, which of course didn't exist, and debt. Get everybody hooked on debt. You may not be able to afford this house, but you can take a mortgage, and by the time you pay it off, you will pay 3 times its value, and the rest of your life will be spent in slavery to paying for this house. Why have cars gone up? I mean, just a few years ago, you could go buy a new car for a few $1,000s. I mean, nobody paid $20,000 for a car in the 90s unless you were buying like a Mercedes or something even more expensive, right? Now you can't buy a new Ford pickup truck for less than about $30,000. What happened? Well, when they convinced people, this is a really nice vehicle. I want you to drive away in this today. Let's set you up with a car loan and you can pay on it over time. Well, the minute you drive that vehicle off the lot, it becomes worth half what you paid for it. So it was never worth that much in the first place, okay? That's all just sticker price. It's not actually worth that amount. That's the markup for the privilege of being able to take out a loan. And over the course of that loan, you'll pay 2 or 3 times the value of that car. That $25,000 car is going to cost you $75,000 if you keep it for 20 years and pay it off. But you're not going to keep it. Within the next 10 years, you're going to go back to the dealership and they're going to say, hey, look at this one. We'll just roll your loan into this one. We'll take your trade in, so to speak, roll your loan into this one, and now instead of having a loan on a $30,000 car, you've got a loan on a $50,000 car. That's slavery to debt. And that's what our economy is based on now. That's how our government operates, and that's how our individual citizens operates, and that's why so few people can actually have that small farm and that little cider making operation, or a few cows for butter and cheese and milk, or a few pigs or whatever, or some timber. Timber used to be the greatest source of wealth. That's what's changed. Add into that student loans. You go to this college for 4 to 12, 16 years, right? And the more you study, well, the more degrees you're going to get, and the more money you're promised to make when you leave here, right? The more education you have, the more wealthy you're going to be. So why not go ahead and take out all these loans? Because, as soon as you get out of here, you're going to have all the money you're ever going to need. So people end up with $50,000 or $100,000 in student loans, having earned a basically worthless degree. And I'm not just talking like gender studies or something, or art history. I'm talking, even practical degrees that are about to be replaced by AI. In the next 10, 20 years, basically all the teachers, probably 2/3 of medical staff, insurance processing, banking, you can go down the list. It's going to be done by AI. How the heck are you going to pay off those student mortgages, the student loans? Really, it's time to reevaluate this whole thing, or we're going to be in big trouble when the computers can do the job better than you can do it. And they don't have to do it better than you can do it. They just have to do it better than the average person can do it. You might have a school that's got 50 teachers, and 10 of them are just top notch, right? And 40 of them are average or below average. It's not going to be really hard to come in and say, what, AI can do better than these 40. And no, they may not be as good as these 10, but they're going to be better overall for the system, and they're going to cost less than one person's salary. All the teachers, they're gone. They're out of a job. You're already seeing at banks. At my local bank, they've shut down the drive-through lanes. They've gone from 3 to 5 tellers, like before COVID. They now have one teller. You have to go inside, and she's basically incompetent and can't do a dang thing. You're actually better off doing your banking online. Well, I think it's purposeful. I think they hired the idiot to run the bank so people get so fed up that they don't want to go in there anymore. And within another 5 years to 10, I would say that bank's going to be completely closed. And your only option is going to be to do online banking. And what the heck do you do when the power goes out or the internet goes down? Well, they don't care. They don't care at all. I mean, we found that out when the hurricane came through. They knocked out power throughout the entire county. All the banks were closed. All the ATMs were closed. No one had cell service. What was the government's answer? Well, we're going to deposit $700 in your account so you can buy groceries. Well, we couldn't access it. And even if we could, the stores were closed. So, I mean, it's high time someone with a lot more smarts than me needs to figure this out. That's all I can tell you. One of my good friends, a much older gentleman, he's in his 80s, he was an economist who worked for President Reagan and his administration. He worked with David Rockefeller in the International Bankers Association. He ran the stock market of France and the entire economy of Monaco. Yeah, pretty darn impressive. We get together about once a month and we talk about these things because he appreciates the perspective of a younger person who also is educated in economics, but also has more of a practical viewpoint because he's worked in. I mean, he used to live in the Ritz, okay, in France. I think it was in France. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, he's been really on the. He's like would have been part of the Davos crowd. He wouldn't. He would not have agreed with them. I'm sure he's met Soros many times, but he's part of that kind of group, right? So this is what we talk about. We talk about trends in the culture and stuff just like this and AI and he's trying to figure it out and he's not been able to come up with some very hopeful suggestions. I can tell you that much. I can tell you that much right now. It's looking like we're in for some tough sledding. But God willing, things will be all right. One of the main things he says is you cannot have a nation in which, one, everybody's in debt. Two, is so dependent on government spending, government programs, government subsidies, entitlements, etc., but also all these agencies. The largest employer in America is the federal government, after all. And then allow unfettered illegal immigration to come in and undercut everybody's wages. So his solutions are not going to be popular with anybody on any side of the aisle, but we're going to have some very hard. There's some hard decisions coming, very hard decisions coming, or it's really going to fall apart. And if you don't have land now, I would seriously consider. And I mean, people say invest in gold, invest in Bitcoin, invest in this. The only thing of lasting value is land, because land generally gains value over time. Land never loses value. May not gain a lot over time, but it never loses value. You can grow things on land. You can grow timber. You can grow food. You can put a house on it. You can put several houses on it and sell them off one at a time. You can rent. Land is really the most valuable of all commodities in the world, actually. So back to Serviceberry after that long aside, I suppose I should say. Botany Today states simply, medicinally, the berries may be laxative. Otherwise, the leaf and bark are astringent. And Peterson Field Guide for Eastern and Central Medicinal Plants tells us the Chippewa use root bark tea with other herbs as a tonic for excessive menstrual bleeding, a female tonic, and to treat diarrhea. Cherokee used the herb in combination as a digestive tonic, and a bath of the bark tea was used on children with worms. So, very useful plant, one that is rarely cultivated anymore, and it's a shame. We need to get this one going again. It needs to be growing in everybody's yard if you can possibly grow it. And don't forget about Fiddlehead ferns and bracken, real easy to identify. There are, ferns can be a little tricky to identify because a lot of them look alike. You're going to need a field guide or you're going to need a good phone app, but once you learn to identify ostrich fern or bracken, you're never going to mistake it for another one, and they're quite tasty. As I said, I have an entire book on medicinal uses of ferns. I guess once we work through shrubs, maybe I'll get into that on the show because ferns are fascinating. Really, one of the most fun books I've ever written, getting into not just the medicinal uses and the edible uses, but all the folklore. There's so many legends, and fairy tales and such from different cultures around the world involving ferns. And, as a plant geek and a storyteller and a folk historian, man, I love that. That was really a fun book to write. So if you haven't checked that one out, it's the Medicinal Ferns. And the one I was just reading from is the Medicinal Shrubs and Woody Vines. And neither of them have been great sellers. Honestly, most of my books have sold more, and I think these are really two of the best. So, check them out if you're interested. Anyway, y'all, I wish you a very Merry Christmas. I normally do a special storytelling show for Christmas. I've done it 2 or 3 times, though, and it's in the archives. So look for any of my Christmas episodes if you want to hear my story about Christmas with the Hicks family on Beach Mountain. I honestly can't get through it without crying, so I'm not going to try to do it again this year. It's been kind of a tough year, and I'm not sure I'd be quite up for it, but it is a good one. And so if you're looking for a bonus episode this week, you know what? I'll put a link to it in the show notes. So if you want to click on it, it's good to listen to with your kids or your grandkids or family on Christmas Eve. And magical times up on the backside of Beach Mountain, sitting around the wood stove, telling stories and playing music with Ray Hicks, the great storyteller, and Arvil Hicks, the great storyteller, and Rosie Hicks and Ted, who taught me about herbal medicine, and just a very special place and time, special people. So y'all have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.